coming today. This is the 6th of your 11 programs in the Central Vermont Ollie's Spring Series. 2 more programs here after today, and then 3 at the Savoy, where there'll be films for you with Rick Winston. So, but I'm very excited about today's program. Ever since our speaker agreed to come, it's been my choice for the height of the season here. So, and I think from the looks of the crowd, you share some of my excitement. So, it's great. Bill Torrey has proven his storytelling gifts in national competitions. He is a Moth main stage performer and a 5-time Moth Story Slam winner. And he's a real Vermonter. Hey. We are very lucky to have Bill Torrey here today. And we'll hear from him, and then he'll take questions and comments from you. So we'll let him do his thing, if you would.
Thank you. First thing I'm going to ask you all is to put your cell phones on airplane mode or silent or mute or turn it off, please. Just, it's hard enough to remember all these stories without stopping and saying, oh my God. Anyway, yeah, I'll start telling you. I've written a couple books. One is called the Tatawini Club, which shows you the serious nature of my writing abilities. And the other one is, of course, Cutting Remarks. The Tatawini Club is 21 stories about a kid growing up in Vermont during the 60s. And so I'll just get going on that. I was born in 1957, which means like most of all of you here, we didn't grow up with the internet and computers and cell phones and 150 channels on TV. I had maybe 3 channels on a good clear day, and a lot of that was in black and white. Oh, they were broadcasted in color, but my dad wouldn't buy a color TV set till he figured out they had the technology right, and that turned out to be about 10 years. So things were a lot different. For instance, when my mom would take one of us kids to the doctor's office and the examination was over, her and the doctor would sit and chat while they each smoked a cigarette. My siblings and I were yanked out of my mother with forceps while my dad sat in the designated waiting area. There weren't birthing centers in Lamaze classes. When I was born, I was brought home to my lead-based painted bedroom and placed on my belly in a crib that could fold up like a bear trap. We didn't have car seats, seat belts, and airbags. We didn't have medicine safety caps on tops of medicine bottles or drain cleaner or antifreeze. And riding in the back of my dad's pickup was the closest thing I ever got to an air-conditioned ride. And I ate sausage, ham, bacon, and eggs, and roast beef, and fried chicken, and pork chops, and hot dogs, and hamburgers. And I had cakes, and pies, and ice cream, and donuts. And we drank Kool-Aid by the barrel, made with tons of sugar. And my siblings and I were in the best shape of our lives. That's because we had friends and family and neighbors, and we went outside and did stuff with them. Stuff that involved physical participation. We played baseball, basketball, football, kickball, dodgeball, toss and catch, flies and grounders, freeze tag, Red Rover, hide and seek. And we made stuff. We made trails and jumps for our bikes and sleds and saucers. We made tunnels in the haymound and snowbanks. We made snow forts and tree forts. We made swings from vines and rafters. Hell, we climbed trees just for the fun of it. Yeah. We had hatchets, BB guns, bows and arrows, knives, slingshots, spears. And nobody put an eye out. Sure, we got cut, scraped, banged, bruised, scratched, and knocked down. But we got back up. And we got spanked. We got spanked by paddles, belts, switches, rulers, wooden spoons, spatulas, and fly swatters. And nobody got sued or called Child Protective Services. And when I got in trouble at school, I got in a hell of a lot more trouble when I got home. I grew up with freedom. The freedom to roam the woods and fields and play in a real and wholesome place. I grew up with the freedom to succeed and the freedom to fail. The freedom to learn respect and responsibility. And the freedom for adventure. And I learned how to cope with all of it. I ran through it. I rode through it. I walked, sneaked, and crawled through it. And I came out better for having done so. Now I'm going to tell you some of the tales of those adventures. So like my old man used to say, I'll quit blowing on the fur and get to the hide. I like to think that I grew up in a magical time where lessons could pop out at you in unexpected places like a rabbit out of a hat. For instance, we always had 6 or 8 beef cows when I was a kid growing up. And the first species that we had were Black Angus. But after a while, we got rid of those Angus for 2 reasons. The first reason was they were like wild buffaloes. And they were always busting down the fence and getting loose. And it was just about always at night. Which brings us to the second reason. They were black. You couldn't see them. I remember one dark summer night, I was about 12 years old, and our cows had gotten down on Route 117, and I was given the plum assignment to stand by the gate in the road there, in the road by the gate, and I was supposed to turn them into the gate while my dad and my siblings brought them down the road. So I'm standing there in the pitch dark when suddenly I hear the pounding of hoofs on pavement, getting louder, coming closer. And then I hear this wild bellowing. It's not the cows, it's my dad. He's screaming, stop them, turn them. But I can't see them. And then I thought, maybe they can't see me. So I jumped up on that gate and got just a glimpse of them as they went going by. Mostly just the whites of their eyes. So we phased out of those Angus and trucked them off for freezer paper. And I'll tell you, just getting them into a truck was an event in itself. It was like watching a poorly run rodeo without horses, just clowns. Now, so we went to white-faced Herefords. Well, at least you can see those. Now, our cows were wild, but they really weren't mean, except for one. And his name was El Toro. And he was huge. He had a wicked set of horns on him, and he would run you down if he caught you in his pasture. Well, I was about 14. I was going to go down back, go fishing in Winooski, runs behind our farm, and you have to cross the railroad tracks too to get to the river, and I also have to cross El Toro's pasture. Well, I was daydreaming. I forgot all about El Toro, and I got about halfway across that pasture, and then I spot him over there. Spot him over there on the side, and he spots me. Starts walking towards me. Well, I start eyeballing the distance to that railroad fence up ahead and pick it up to a fast walk. El Toro starts to trot. I start to jog. El Toro breaks into a gallop. I break into a sprint. Now, a railroad fence is about this high. It's made of wire of 10-inch squares, and it goes all the way to the ground. You can't just roll under it quick like. You got to climb it out by a post, right next to a post, kind of like a ladder. And as I'm running towards the fence, all this is going through my head, and it suddenly dawns on me. A tie at the fence is the same as a loss. And I realize there's only one thing for me to do, and I turn at the fence and I face El Toro, and he's steaming down on me like a hairy locomotive. And I put up my scrawny little arm and I just scream as loud as I can, "Stop!" And El Toro, he slams to a stop. So close to me, I can smell his hot, rancid breath in my face, and I take my trusty self-bent fishing pole and I whip him across the nose with it, and I scream, "Get the hell out of here!" And as he turns to go, I gave him one more swat on his ass, just for good measure. When I turned 18, I went out into the world on my own, moved out of our house. And in doing so, I learned a lot about life, a lot about living. But the first time that I had to stand my ground, no matter how scared you are, no matter what the odds are, just because you know it's the right thing to do, that was something I learned all by myself one day in a cow pasture. And if that's not magical, I don't know what the hell is. Thanks. Oh.
El Toro was there too.
El Toro ended badly. He got out on the railroad tracks a while later, and Amtrak came through and scattered him for about 100 yards.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Poor El Toro.
No. The railroad company, Amtrak, paid my old man like $600 because their fence was the one reason he got on the track. Most money he ever made off one of our cows. All right, now let's move into the educational aspect of my journey. When I was in the third grade, me and my classmates were incarcerated at the Little White Schoolhouse on the corner of Route 15 and 128 in Essex Center. Now, all the other grades were about 200 yards down 128 at the main elementary school. And for us kids at the Little White Schoolhouse, it felt like being on Alcatraz, cut off from the mainland. And the warden of the prison was Mrs. Make sure she's not here. Well, we called her Old Lady Assburn. It was 1965, and corporal punishment was alive and kicking at the Little White Schoolhouse. She had many ways to straighten us out. For instance, if you gave her any lip or spoke out of turn, she'd make you stick your tongue out, and she'd clip a clothespin on it. Now, of course, her favorite was the old stand with your nose in a corner routine. Yeah. Crude but effective. John Patry spent most of the third grade with his nose in one corner of that school. You see, John was the unofficial ringleader of the little band of brothers that came together to annoy, pester, and piss off old lady Asper. She once made John roll a crayon across the floor with his nose. Now, in retaliation, somebody, I won't say who, put a tack on old lady Aspern's desk chair. And boy, did that get a rise out of her. Now, the battle seesawed back and forth. And the headquarters for the resistance was the basement, the bathroom in the downstairs basement of the little white schoolhouse. Now, you went down about 8 stairs to a little landing, and then you turned to the right, went down another 3 or 4 more stairs. And on the right-hand side, there was a toilet stall. And on the left-hand side, there was a sink. And right straight across the stairs, about 6, 8 feet, was a long trough-type urinal. Old Lady Asper had never invaded our sanctuary, and we were lulled into a false sense of security. It was late in the spring. A bunch of us guys were down there farting around, and it was John who came up with this wonderful sort of challenge. Who among us could pee the farthest? Well, Hub Roby went first. He started whizzing away there at the urinal. He backed all the way up to the bottom of the stairs. Still going strong. Probably could have gone farther. Ray Porter went next. Now, he started blasting away, made it all the way back to the stairs, got up onto the first stairs, still nailing it dead center. And, you know, we thought that was pretty good, but we thought we had stronger candidates. And then it was my turn. Of course, all the guys are yelling and squealing and laughing like 8-year-old boys tend to do, you know, cheering us on. Well, I start whizzing away and I back right up to those stairs, get right up on the first stair, still nailing it dead center. I adjust for Kentucky windage, get up on the second stair, still going strong, when suddenly a dark shadow looms behind me. And old lady Asper grabs me right by the scruff of the neck. Now, trying to shut down while you're going full bore ain't an easy thing to do. Trying to shut down and zip up while you're being drugged up a flight of stairs, I'll tell you, that's even tougher. You know, watch you don't get the old Franken beans in the zipper. Well, she dragged me up and into that classroom, and she skids me over to the corner, and she jams my nose in it. And she leans down, she whispers in my ear, and I can still recall her cigarette and coffee tainted breath in my face. And she says, "You so much as twitch your head 1 inch one way or the other, and I'm going to paste you one you'll never forget." Well, I'll tell you, I don't know how long I stood there with my nose in that corner. Lord knows I couldn't see the clock. I do know it was all the way through history and part of English class. And boy, did I learn my lesson that day. One that served me well, not only for the rest of the school year, but for the rest of my life. And that lesson being, no, when it comes to a pissing contest, there really ain't no winners. My father was a mechanical genius. He was a mechanic all his life. He worked 43 years at the Vermont Transit bus garage. He ran the garage for many of those years. And he could build or fix anything. So as a kid, I always had, you know, go-karts, mini bikes, you name it. But the best thing he ever made was what we called the bush buggy. He took a Volkswagen Beetle, stripped it right down to the frame, cut 28 inches out of the middle, shoved it back together and welded it up. You see, this shortened the wheelbase on it so it could go over stuff without getting hung up. And it also shortened the turning radius on it. Well, you could turn on a dime, give you 9 cents change. Now, he took the bucket seats out of it and he put the bench seat in where the bucket seat is so that you could put 3 people in there. And there was still room for a cargo seat right behind that, which he put in. And he put a roll bar right between the two because we needed one. And he was so proud of that bush buggy. He taught a lot of kids how to drive on that bush buggy. A lot of us kids, some successfully. I have a sister who still to this day can't drive a hen off a nest. But I remember when he was teaching her to drive, they tried to teach her the difference between the brake and the gas. They went through the squash patch, through the fence, into the cow pasture, and we're heading for the gully. My dad is screaming, "Brakes, brakes!" Well, he finally got it stopped, and the next modification he did to the bush buggy, he brought back into the garage, and he put an engine kill switch right in front of the passenger seat. He even put a label over it. It said, "Panic button." He said he never panicked so much in his life. And he had done 4 war patrols in the subs in the South Pacific there over during World War II. Well, anyway, like I say, he was proud of that bush buggy. He said it could go more places than a Jeep. And he proved it this one day. You see, we kept the bush buggy up to our camp up in West Bolton. Now, which is where I live now. Now, let me just say a little something about our camp. My dad bought, it was kind of on a dead-end road. And my uncle and him kicked in together to buy some land. They each had $25 and they bought an acre of land. Now, they'd spent all their money on the land, so they didn't have a whole lot for building material. So that first camp was a lot of scrounged up lumber and held together by tar paper and high hopes. I was pretty small when that camp was there, but I remember that the ceiling of it was made out of cardboard, not sheetrock. Sheetrock cost money. It was cardboard. And I remember as a little kid, us kids laying in our bunks at night. It was supposed to be a deer camp, you see. That's what they bought it for. I only know of one legal deer, I say that, legal, ever being shot at that camp. But we would sit in our bunks and shoot at the mice running on top of that cardboard in the dark, which is actually really good practice when you think about it, because shooting by sound in the dark is a fair description of opening day of deer season. Now, the road kind of ended at our place. It did keep on going. It was just 2 wheel tracks in the grass. Now it's Leary Road, which is regular road. But back then it was just 2 wheel tracks in the grass, and about a quarter of a mile or so, half mile past our camp, it went alongside some beaver ponds, where for about 100 yards, the road and the beaver pond were kind of the same thing. It made a wicked mud hole, and you had to have a real good rig to go through it and a good driver. Well, one Saturday, my dad and I were up there, and we ended up tooling around on the bush buggy, and we end up down by that beaver pond, and there's just this hive of activity going on. Seems Windy Mallow, a neighbor up the road, had gone down, lost a coon dog, and he was down there looking for it. He tried to go through that mud hole, and he buried it right to the gills. So he walked up and got his dad, Gerald, with his Jeep in a stout chain, and they went back down there, and they buried that one right behind the second one. So they hiked out to Gary Pratt's farm, and they got Gary with his tractor, and he came down, and he planted his tractor right behind the 2 Jeeps. So he shagged his ass back out to the farm and got this great big tractor. He came back, and he pulled all of them out. And it was at this point that my dad and I showed up on the bush buggy. They were all standing around there shooting the breeze, picking up chain and stuff. And they told us what happened. You know, we said our how do you do's and stuff. And my dad just leans over to me and he says, hang on to something. We hit that mud hole doing about 30 probably. Fleeced our way across, all the way across to the other side. He shoved it around reverse, and then he just hammered it right back through that mud hole again. He pulls up alongside the boys that are sitting there with their mouths open, and he shuts it off. And Wendy says, geez, I'm crow, Jim. He says, that's a going rig. He said, I would have never believed you could go through that. Dad says, oh, he says, you just have to have a firm hand on the wheel and keep your foot glued right to the floor. He says, helps clean the carbon out too. Well, they picked up their stuff and they left. And my dad says, let's take a little ride around these back fields. There are some scrub fields over behind those beaver ponds and stuff. And it was when we were tooling around behind in those fields where he didn't see this beaver channel. And we went right into it, and we buried the ass end of that bush buggy in that beaver channel, and we're stuck bad. And he jumps out, and he's walking around it, and he's pacing around. You can see the beads of sweat coming off him. Every now and then he scans the edge of the field, make sure nobody's watching. See his bush buggy stuck. And then he says, slide over to the seat there, boy, and drive. He says, I'm going to get my shoulder down behind her there and see if I can get her up out of there. And when I say give it to her, you give it to her. I said, but Dad, don't you think? He says, hey, you let me do the thinking. You just do what I tell you. So he got down there behind it and gets standing down there in the mud and stuff behind it. He gets his shoulder and he says, okay, give it to her. Well, I tromped down on it like I was trying to push that thing through the floorboards. Well, we didn't move for a second, but then we started to go, and I kept her glued right down there, you know, and I glanced over my shoulder, and I can see a roost of mud shooting out behind me like a fire hose on one side. And when I come up on the dry ground, I stop, and this mud-encrusted creature, the same size and shape of my dad, comes staggering out of the pucker brush. And he smelled bad. He smelled like a wallowing moose, you know. And he comes up to the bush buggy. I look at him and I said, but you said give it to her. And he says, yes, yes, I did. And you did a real good job. He says, now slide over. He says, let's get the hell out of here before somebody sees us. And as he sloshed down into the seat beside me there, he turns and looks at me, and I can see this little bit of a smile start to crack through the mud there. And we both started laughing so hard, I think I had tears running down my leg. The next modification on the bush buggy was a set of mud flaps on the rear. Said it was like shutting the barn door after the horse is gone. You know, a lot of kids didn't learn to drive until they turned 15 and got their learner's permit. I learned how to drive a stick when I was 11 years old. It was also about this time that I learned that my dad wasn't the Superman that we all think our dads are when we're little. He was just a regular guy, just doing the best he could. And I learned something else that day, something that my dad often repeated in later years, and that is that the most dangerous part of any vehicle is the nut holding the steering wheel. I'm from a family of 6 kids. I'm the youngest. And like many families back in the 60s, my mom controlled the household, but my dad ruled the roost. And he did so with a firm hand and a dry wit, an occasional foot in the ass when needed. He taught me a strong work ethic at a very early age. I remember one Saturday morning, I was probably around 10, 12 years old. I was sitting inside watching cartoons, having a bowl of cornflakes, and he came in and he said, boy, he said, how would you like to be a pilot? I said, a pilot? I said, yeah, I'd love to be a pilot. I think I was watching the Jetsons. He said, great. I just dumped a load of firewood out by the shed. Get out there and pilot. He used the same philosophy on me with hay bales during the summer. I'd be on the back of the truck, and I'll tell you, those summer days, hand was hot. It was hotter than hell with a lid on it. And I'd be in the back of the truck. I was the pilot on the truck, sweating like a hairy ox. And sooner or later, Dad would come over, and he'd set a bale on the tailgate, and he'd say, careful boy, this here's a tender one. Now, when my dad designated the bale as being tender, that meant that it was a large hay-filled slinky that I had to get onto the truck and into the barn without busting it. Because if I broke a bale, oh, look out. He'd start in on me. He'd say something like, oh, you must have yanked on the strings. But more importantly, he'd probably say, you must have horsed it. See, horsing it was one of his favorites, because you could horse just about anything. From a fish on the line to a lawnmower. I was once accused of horsing a potato hook. And spearing a potato with your potato hook was right up there with bale busting. Of course, he could bust a bale. It was a completely different story. He'd say something like, that knotter on the baler must need greasing. Bale just broke on me. Like he was the victim of some great grease-hoarding conspiracy cooked up by the baler. Or he could spear a potato, wouldn't bat an eye. He'd just give it a disgusted look as he'd take it off his hook and say, must have been one that grew outside the hill. Like it was some renegade mongrel potato and it deserved a good spearing. Of course, this was the same man that would chase us kids around the kitchen table with a big spoonful of horseradish. You never knew if he'd spoon it in if you caught you, but you didn't want to find out the hard way. You see, this was his brand of entertainment that he knew he could get away with because he was the head honcho of the family and he ruled with supreme authority. Now, as his kids, we thought it was our sworn duty to evade, elude, and circumvent that authority, especially as we became teenagers. But trying to outfox my old man was like trying to sneak sunrise past a rooster. I'll tell you, now the greatest, my siblings will say that I had it easy because I was the youngest and they wore him down. And to that, I say, bullshit. They sharpened his senses by repeated practice. I would admit that I had a little bit of advantage by seeing the often feeble attempts that my older siblings made to try to sneak around my dad. It was kind of like watching game tapes of opponents you'll be facing in the future, you know. Anyway, the greatest deception ever attempted against my dad occurred in 1973 when I turned 16 and got my driver's license. Because I not only saw it as a license to drive, I saw it as a license to park with a girl. And I had one of those. All I needed was a secluded place to do so. And I found one by using our deer camp driveway about 12 miles away. And for a while, things were great. I was happier than a woodchuck in soft dirt. But then I got greedy. I got to thinking, wouldn't it be nice, as long as we were there, if we could go inside the camp? And it was this greed, this Randy obsession, that really muddied up the creek. Because there was only one key that I knew of to that camp. And it was in a place where no kid had ever gone before. The wallet of my old man. Which for all practical purposes was pretty much glued right to his ass. However, my motives were substantial. So I devised a plan. Now, surveillance revealed that my parents would go out on the weekend, usually at least once every weekend they'd go out. And this would require my dad, as he so elegantly put it, shave, shower, and shampoo. And he would always do this in the downstairs basement bathroom. However, he would leave his wallet upstairs on the bureau next to the bed. Now, being a creature of habit, before he would step under that shower head, he would always yell at the top of his lungs, "Going in!" You see, this was to avoid any upstairs toilet flushers and avoid being scalded like a pig. Now, and on the chosen night, it was also my secret battle cry, because I was going in. I crept into my parents' bedroom like James Bond going for the microfilm. I go in there and I look at the wallet and I start to reach for it. My hand's shaking like a 50-cent ladder. I pick it up, remove the key, replace it perfectly, leave the bedroom, hop in my car, blast up to Oberschan's, have a key made, blast back, and as I'm walking towards the bedroom, I can hear my dad's footsteps coming up the basement stairs. I'm too late. Now you see, if he goes to camp before I can get that key back in there, my goose is cooked. Because just a couple weeks before, a game warden had seen my car parked at camp and he called my dad with my plate number. And I'd lied my way out of it. I told him me and my girlfriend were up there picking berries. Oh, we were picking berries, all right. But don't you see, if his key comes up missing, he's smart enough to connect the dots. So I'm praying to whatever horny teenage boy gods that there are in this world to come to my aid. And I waited, and I bide my time. More importantly, I didn't horse it. In the next week, not only did I restore the key, but also my faith in the power of prayer. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to switch now to some of my login stories. I've worked 40 years in the woods. Did my first log job when I was 16. I'll just jump right into a story. Most of what I learned in the woods was by trial and error. There wasn't much for training, just trial and error, and heavy on the error side a lot. And I started working. I had a job. Me and my best friend Art had a job as a two-man cutting and bunching crew up in Eden, Vermont. I'll tell you more about Art in a little bit. Anyway, we were a couple wagon races up the Skid Row, way up near the top of the mountain. Really steep, nasty terrain. It was 9 o'clock lunch. We started at 7. At 9 o'clock, we'd take a break. And Glenn, the subcontractor, the contractor we were working for, he'd ride the skidder up at 9 o'clock lunch and see how we were doing, kind of crack the whip. And we're sitting there on a log, and he points up this steep hillside right up behind us, all ledge and rock and stuff up there. And there's this huge yellow birch. And he points at it and he says, make sure you cut that yellow birch up there, he says, before you guys leave here. And I look at it and it looks like a dead stub. It's a huge tree and fairly short because we're so high on the mountain, it stunted its growth some. But I don't think there's a live limb on it. There's busted off pieces and everything. I said, Grimus, Glenn, you think that's any good? I said, it looks like a dead stub. He says, you cut it. He says, I'll bet you it's just as red as a fox's tail. He says, you cut that and we'll find out. And then he started walking down the skid road. Well, Art went to go bunch a couple trees with the crawler. He was running the bulldozer. And I shimmy my way up and scratch my way up that bank. And I get up there alongside the tree, and it's a huge tree, 4 foot or better on the stump. Biggest tree I'd come across so far in my career. And I'm looking at it, and I can hardly stand next to it. It's so steep. It's just all ledge and rock. And I keep looking at it, and son of a gun, I don't think this thing's any good. Anyway, I pawed some footholes in the forest duff there next to it, and I fired up an old blister, my saw, and I'm thinking, I only got a 20-inch bar on this saw. I hope I got enough saw to cut this thing. And I think, you know what, this ain't no good. This tree's gonna be hollow. In the center of this tree, it ain't gonna mount to a fart in a whirlwind. So I started cutting on it, and I cut my notch, my scarf out on the downhill side. It was leaning heavy downhill. It's the only way it was going to go. I cut a good notch out of it, and then I started coming around on the backside on my back cut, my finishing cut. And I got the saw screaming full bore, and I'm just cutting away, and I'm watching my sawdust, because your sawdust will tell you what's going on in the tree. And I notice I'm getting nice long red shavings, not mealy dust like I would in a rotten tree. I'm still coming around thinking, oh my God, I think this tree's good. I think this tree's going to be solid. And I keep coming around. I come around all the way to the other side. I've cut all that I can. I can't reach in and cut anymore. And the tree's trying to go. That back cut's starting to open up, and the tree's trying to go, and it's trying to go. And all the weight of this huge tree now is hanging out on this mountainside like this. Now, any other tree probably would have barber chaired, but not this gnarly old mountain-grown yellow birch. She's just hanging out there like this, and I don't know what to do. I'm standing there when all of a sudden, in about a 30-foot circle all around me, the whole root ball of that tree just starts rising up out of the ground with me on it. Well, I'm right partial to my chainsaws. They cost a lot of money, and I don't abandon a saw if I can help it, but I knew I was in trouble, two-handed trouble. So I dropped old Blister, and I just made a running dive off of that root ball. I didn't know where the hell I was diving to, but I figured any place would be better than where I am. And I landed on that mountainside on my side, just barely missed some jagged rocks. And then I'm rolling down the bank, and I'm trying to get a purchase on anything I can. And there's rocks and debris and stuff falling over me, and someone took my hard hat off, and I finally got a grip on about a 2-inch beech, and I held on like grim death, which I thought was pretty close to me at the time. And that old birch just churned its way down the mountain for about 150 feet or better, and taking everything in its path down with it. Well, when things finally come to a halt, I sat up and I checked myself over. My shirt was ripped right here. I had a nice gash, scratch down that side, and it kind of hurt to breathe a little. My knee was kind of banged up, but it still worked. I figured I was okay, and I said, time to find old Blister, because I could still hear her running. And I went down, and she was in this little nook right underneath that root ball, just sitting in there, and I reached in. She was purring like a cat by a warm stove. And I sneaked in, I grabbed her out and shut her off. And I was sitting on a stump when Art pulled up on the dozer and shuts it off. And he surveys the debris and damage behind me on this mountainside. And he just says, "What the hell, Willie?" Well, I told him what happened, hitting all the high points. And he was some disappointed he missed my performance. And we had a ticklish of a time cutting that yellow birch off the rest of the way off of that root ball, because it was up in the air. That root ball kept it up in the air. Art put the nose of the blade of the dozer up against it best he could, and I stood on the nose of the dozer and just nipped at it as gingerly as I could until I got what I could. And then we turned the dozer around, and an 8-foot choker wouldn't go around that tree. We had to tie two chokers together, two 8-foot chokers together to go around it, and he was able to snap off what was left. And I couldn't help but notice, as he went to bunch it, that it was just as red as a fox's tail and sound as a dollar. I, on the other hand, was so lame and stained up for the next two days I couldn't fart without crying. But such is the life of the logger in the great North Woods. Okay, I'm going to tell you about Art. I met Art back when we was in the 3rd grade, incarcerated together there in that little white schoolhouse. And we were best friends ever since. We did our first log job together when we were 16 years old. And we knew that we wanted to work in the woods from then on. We knew the woods were calling to us, but our parents would not let us answer the call. They made it clear that we were college bound. And being the obedient son, I resigned myself to my fate. Fate. Do you believe in fate? Do you believe in luck? Do you believe that things are providential? I'll tell you what I believe. Okay, you're going to have to leave. No, I'm just
Turned it off. What the hell?
Are we done?
Power off.
Thank you.
Power off.
Thank you. Anyway, do you believe that things are providential? I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that providence doesn't fire any blank cartridges. And I'll tell you why. When I was 17, I just graduated high school, and during that summer, it was a beautiful August morning, and my mom was walking out to go work in the garden, and as she went down a slight incline, there was dew on the grass, and she slipped and fell. It wasn't a hard fall. She got up and went on her way, but later that evening, she started to feel sick. And as it went on, she was in agony, and my dad rushed her to the hospital. The doctors thought that the fall had maybe loosened a blood clot. So they started treating her with blood thinners for the next few days, and she just kept getting worse. And they finally figured out that all this time, she'd had a ruptured spleen. And now emergency surgery was needed, but because of all the blood thinners, when they operated on my mom, they couldn't stop the bleeding. She was 52 years old, the mother of 6 kids, and now she's dead. And I realized that she was dead for one reason and one reason only. There was dew on the grass. Well, about a week and a half later, so I'm shipped off to Vermont Tech to college. The only good thing about it is Art's my roommate. And at the end of that first semester, I got a 2.9, Art got a 2.8. We didn't flunk out, but we both quit. And we quit, not because we can't do the work. It's because we can't do the life that we saw down the road that we was being shoved along. And we figured out, there's all kinds of dew on the grass in this life, and we're not going to waste any of it doing something that doesn't suit us. If life's a parade, don't spend your time walking behind the elephants. So we enrolled in a vocational logging school out in Maine. Turns out it only takes 6 months to learn how to be a logger. Yeah. In a year and a half or so later, we're back in Vermont, and Art and I got us a job as a 2-man cutting and bunching crew for Glenn. He was a contractor up in Enid. Glenn was a gangly old guy. He was tall. Well, he could hunt geese with a long rake, but big ears. And he was a logger all his life. His dad was a logger before him and his before that. And I learned a lot working for Glenn. Well, there came we were working by, I'm going to just tell you, we were working by the tree. We were being paid 80 cents a tree. I was getting 80 cents to cut. Art was getting 80 cents to bunch. I had to supply, now remember, this was 1978, where minimum wage was $2.20 an hour. Now, I had to supply my own chainsaw, gas and oil. Art had to supply his own cable for the winch on the back of the dozer that Glenn had, and his own chokers. You see, this allowed Glenn to hire us as subcontractors and avoid paying any workman's comp insurance or anything. Because as he pointed out, we probably wouldn't need it anyway.
Yeah, right.
Well, we were damn good at it. We were averaging 75 trees a day. Our best was 110. So we were making $60 a day back in 1978 and having a picnic every day. Sometimes that picnic was froze solid. But anyway, came a hot, steaming day. We was working, it was hot, hotter than 2 rats screwing in a wool sock. It was hot. We're working up the mountain. We're on this little bench, kind of a shelf up there, about 50 foot wide. And we're cutting marked trees by the forester, marked with blue paint. Now we're cutting on the shelf too, but also up the mountainside as far as we can reach by dropping trees downhill. Now I'm up on the bank. I dropped the tree downhill towards the bench. I limbed it out, cut the limbs off it, and then I topped it off where the log ended. So I limbed it out and I topped it off. And then I look back up the mountainside up there and I see another tree marked with blue paint. And this is a great big old beech. And it's marked with 2 spots of paint. So I make my way up to it. And it's, like I say, a huge beech. And 2 spots of paint mean I'm not supposed to cut the tree. I'm supposed to girdle the tree. Now, girdling a tree means I take my chainsaw and I go around about waist high or so, all the way around the circumference of the tree, about 2-3 inches deep, until the cuts meet. And this kills the tree, but leaves it standing. And I get 10 cents a tree for girdling. So I girdle the tree, did a good job, and head back down the hill. Now I'm down on the flat, and I've cut down another tree, and I'm working along it, cutting the limbs off it. He's got the dozer 20, 30 feet away from the butt of it, and he's pulling cable and choker to it and hooking onto it. And as I step forward to cut another limb off the tree, all of a sudden I'm blindsided by Art. He grabs me in this running tackle. And I think, well, what in the Sam Hill is he doing, grabbing me while I'm running my chainsaw? And I drop the saw, and he keeps me in this bear hug as we hit the ground, and then he keeps me rolling on the ground as that big old girdle beech comes pounding right down on our ankles, right behind us. And we stand up together, side by side, and we look at this huge tree laying right where I was just working. And I turned to Art and I said, "Holy shit, Art. That damn near killed me. You saved my life, man." And he just reached out and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Hell, Willie, you'd have done the same thing for me." You know, we walked up to the butt of that big beech, and that tree was just as hollow as a politician's promise. So you see, when I girdled it, I cut just about everything that was keeping it standing. And you know, we never really talked about that day ever again. Several years ago, Art was in the hospital, and I gave him a call, and he told me that, well, he wasn't his first time in there, you see. He had had like a dozen operations over the last 20 years because of his Crohn's disease. And he told me that the doctors had just left his room. Told me there wasn't anything else they could do for him. And they were sending him home to die. Hell, I didn't know what to say to him on the phone, so I just figured I'd say what he'd expect to hear from me, and I just said, "Damn it, Art, that really sucks a hind tit, don't it?" When he got home from the hospital, I went and visited him. And as he lay there on his deathbed, we left nothing unsaid. We know that we'll meet again sometime. We know that the bond that is between us, that it goes beyond this world. We figured that out years and years ago on that mountainside. We learned that logging and life can be a hard school. where the lessons are often given only once. It wasn't long after Art's passing that I left the woods that I'd worked in most of my life. Because I knew that I used to enjoy the running of the gauntlet, the challenges of the job. But I'd somehow lost my edge. I'd lost my way. And with Art gone, who would save me? So I got me a job next door at the golf course, cutting grass instead of trees. And I'd much rather have grass on me than a tree. Oh, there's still dew on the grass. I just mowed right through it. Because Providence doesn't fire any blank cartridges. See that thing on my hand?
Yeah.
I burned that stoking the wood stove the other day. Anybody here got a wood stove? There you go. When I was logging, I only worked for Glenn for a few years, and then we were cutting 300 trees a week and stuff, but we were just hammering the woods. It was just, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And it wasn't long after where I went off on my own using light on the land equipment. Basically, I got the smallest equipment I could get and still do a good job in the woods, still get out timber. And I did a lot of work, about 20 years of my work, I did a lot of work for Vermont Family Forest, which is a nonprofit in Bristol. It's a co-op of landowners. But anyway, for about 30 years of my career, I had a firewood operation where I would supply split firewood to residential homes. I had a little 1-ton truck that I would bring it to, and I've got hundreds, maybe even thousands of cords of wood. And most all the people I met were really nice people. But I'm going to tell you a story about one that wasn't. I'm going to call him Harry, because this is a hairy story. It was early December, colder than a polar bear's toenails. It was like this winter here, where the wolves are starting to eat the sheep just for the wool. You like that one, didn't you? Anyway, I got an order for a cord of wood. So I loaded up the 1-ton truck with a cord of wood. And me and my dog, Wolfie. Wolfie was my co-pilot. We got in and we went to deliver it. And it was out on Route 15 in Underhill. And I come to the address. And as I pull in, there's this couple standing next to this beat-up old pickup truck. Now, let me just describe Harry. Harry was about 6'3", with long, brown, greasy hair, beard, and teeth. And his girlfriend, they was a match set. You could use her to cure hiccups. Well, I pull in there, and Harry comes up to my truck window, and he tells me he wants me to drive up his driveway up to I can see his house way up there, and dump the wood up there. Well, there's about a foot of snow on the driveway. And I say, buddy, I said, there's no way I'm going to make it up that hill with all that snow on there. Well, Harry didn't want to hear that, and not too politely, he said if I was any good and my truck was halfway decent, it could go up that road and everything. So I said, you know what? I didn't argue with him. I just said, okay, I'll give it a try. I knew I wasn't going to make it. So I give it to her, the old 1-ton, and I made it maybe a quarter of the way up before it started to get steep, and then the old C30 starts to jig, starts to jump up and down and jigging and stuff, and I'm done. So put in reverse, and I start backing up, trying to stay in my tracks and not go in the ditch. And Harry now, who has followed me up the hill, up the driveway, is now following me back down the driveway, standing right in front of my grill, yelling and screaming obscenities at me like a crazy man, which at this point I'm starting to think he is. And as we get down to where his truck is, I see there's another place shoveled out there where I can back in. And I back into that, and he comes up to my window, just yelling, screaming, telling me what a worthless son of a bitch I am, that my truck's a piece of shit, and and I'm just dump it right here since I'm so worthless and stuff. Well, I've had enough. And I said, mister, you can go piss up a rope. Get your wood somewhere else. Now, in hindsight, probably not the best thing to say, because it was at this point that he reached in the window to grab me. Did I tell you I had my dog Wolfie with me? Wolfie was about 80 pounds of muscle and bone, and me and Wolfie were tight. And he come across my lap with a growling snarl and caught just a little bit of the guy's coat sleeve as he yanked his arm back out of the truck and went ass over tea kettle into the snowbank behind him. Well, I thought this was a good time to get the hell out of Dodge, and I threw that truck in gear and wheeled it out down Route 15 like a big-ass bird, leaving Harry and his beloved standing in the middle of the road, yelling and screaming and making crude hand gestures. Now, you'd think this would be the end of it, and you'd be wrong. Because as I look in my rear view mirror, I see that beat up old pickup truck come fleecing out on the driveway, and they start chasing me down Route 15 with her driving and Harry hanging out the passenger side, still yelling and screaming and giving me the bird. Well, they kept trying to pass me, but I wouldn't let them by. And as I come into Essex there, I come into at Essex Discount Beverage, I see there's an Essex police cruiser parked. So I wing it right in next to the cruiser, and I see the cruiser's empty. And I jump out of that truck, and I am running for that door, and I can see the reflection on the glass. I can see Harry's truck pulling behind me, and he jumps out, and he's coming on the run. Well, I bust into the store, and I see the police officer. He's at the counter. Now, the police officer was old Zane Snelling. I grew up in Essex. Zane lived about half a mile down the road from me. We'd met. And I run up to him and said, Officer Snelling, I said, we got problems, and it's coming right in the door behind me. And it did. Harry comes busting into the door, and he runs up to me just a yelling and a cussing and a swearing at me, saying how he's going to drag my ass out in the parking lot and beat the shit out of me. And old Zane just stands there and with his mouth open and his eyes bugged out like a stepped-on toad. Don't say nothing. And Harry keeps running me up and down. Finally, Zane speaks up and he says, "What? Now you watch your language." At which point, Harry turns to him and says to shut the hell up or he's going to drag his ass out in the parking lot and beat the shit out of him too. And Zane just stands there, don't do a thing. And then he turns back to me, Harry does, and he says, "I'm going to get you, you son of a bitch. I'm going to find out where you live and I'm going to make you pay. You and that goddamn dog of yours too." Well, I consider myself a fairly easygoing individual. My dad always taught me that life's a lot easier when you plow around the stumps. But you don't threaten a person's dog. I stepped right up to him. I said, "I already know where you live, you crazy bastard." And I thought me and Harry were going to start swinging right there, but apparently he thought better of it. And he said a few more choice words and then slammed his way out the door, got in his truck and drove off. And I turned to old Zane and I said, "Gee, Officer Snelling, that didn't pan out the way I hoped." And then I went out and I got in my truck and I gave Wolfie a great big hug, thanked him for saving my ass, and then I drove on home. And when I got there, my wife said, "A guy named Harry had just called. Said he'd like to stop by and pay you if he just knew where I lived." And she told him. So for the next 3 weeks, I'm packing heat everywhere I go. My wife tells me, she says, "Oh, you're overreacting. Harry's not going to hurt anybody. And she was right. Because just a couple days later, I opened up the free press, and there's a picture of Harry. He's been arrested for robbing a bank with a BB gun. So I put my real gun away. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
That's great, you did well. Don't feel you need to fill the whole time.
Okay.
Leave a little time for
Yes. All right, then. I guess, that'll be it. Let's leave it open for questions right now, if you like. Are there any? Did I leave anything unsaid? Yes, Anne.
I love the stories, especially the one about learning to drive. And I want you to know that it's the same in upstate New York. At the age of 16, my family never had a car. My wonderful boyfriend said, I will teach you to drive on a 36 Ford. And so he lived out in the country, and I hadn't been there yet. I just had met him a while before. So we drove out this country road, and he said, oh, turn here into the driveway. And he never said anything about slowing down. So I drove diagonally through the cornfield. My mother came running out and said, oh, Walter, what happened? That's how I met my mother-in-law.
I found that the Tata Weenie Club stories are universal. That's not just about Vermont. It's all over the country. Everybody has a little Tata Weenie hiding in each and every one of you. See, the Tata Weenie Club was a real club. In order to join the club, if I had time, I could have told that story. But to join the club, you had to perform a stupidity that warranted you being called a Tata Weenie. Pretty simple. The drawback was that it was former members or members of the Tata Weenie Club, or as we call them, survivors, that would pick out what the act of stupidity would be for the ones that wanted to join. So, little drawback there. But you'd be surprised the idiots that lined up to join the club. Yes.
So how'd you get started with the moth?
I did a story. I just gotten out of the woods, and I was writing the Tata Weenie Club, and I had to take a break, and I just was Googling around storytelling, and I saw a thing about storytelling that was going on in Burlington. It was, I can't remember what the name of it was, but they were having auditions for it, and they were ending like the next day. But I said, oh, what the hell? I'll go down and just tell them a story. And I went down and I told a story. And there was a couple of people at a table in this place, and I just told them a story. I walked out, and my wife said, "How'd you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'll be telling a story there." And yeah, they called me right back and said, "Yeah, we want you." And there wasn't the moth, but then they said, "You've got to do the moth." Once I did that one, that was the first time I did it in front of like 200 people. And people say, how can you, I worked in the woods alone most of my 40 years. And, and how can you just, now you go from the woods working alone to getting up on a stage in front of hundreds, 1,200 people sometimes. And I say, well, I used to get my adrenaline rush cutting trees, dropping huge trees. Now I get it up on the stage, just telling these stories. I love watching you guys. I got some of you guys that are just, you're into the story with me, and it's such good feedback. I just really enjoy it, yeah. And what the hell's gonna happen to me up here? I mean, I've been in the woods. Been in the war, basically, yeah. Yeah, so, yes.
Have you raised a family yourself?
Yes, I have 2 daughters who are now, and I've got 3 grandkids and stuff.
How are they surviving?
They're doing good. They're doing good. Yeah. Yep.
So do you think they're telling stories off to the side?
They may be. I don't know. Probably. Yeah. So.
They know how to drive, right?
Yes, I couldn't teach them though. No, I was just too. No, my wife ended up teaching them because she was more patient than I was. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Whatever happened to your buggy?
The bush buggy, we kept it for such a long time, and then it was sitting in the back of the barn. It was in rough shape and everything. I asked my dad. I said, "Can I get rid of it?" Because I wasn't able to fix it. And by that time, my dad ended up getting Alzheimer's, and I know he wasn't up to it. And so he allowed me to. I actually sold it for like $400 when it was done. Yeah, and of course he asked me for the 400 when I got. My dad was the type he'd give me $10 and go get 2 5-gallon jugs of gas, and it'd be like $25. I'd come back, he'd say, "Where's my change?" And I'd give him some. So, yes, ma'am.
When you're logging, do you log all seasons? And did you ever run into wild animals like a bear or anything like that? Oh.
We log. Well, we stop in the spring during mud season. Sometimes, if you can, you try to find a job that's on pavement so that you don't have to worry about posted roads so much. And on a dry lot, maybe for me, I was a small logger. So it didn't take a lot to keep me busy. And so I try to find a little small spring lot, or sometimes I do some timber stand improvement work where I would just go into a landowner's lot and do stuff with my chainsaw and stuff. But yeah, I would run into animals. I'd also see a lot of sign of animals, of tracks and things and everything. But yeah, I've been dive bombed by goshawks. I've had to chase moose away from my equipment during the fall when a bull moose would decide he thought the dozer was his honey or something. I don't know. But yeah, things like. But when I see all kinds of deer, especially in the winter when you're cutting there in your tops, it's the chainsaw's a dinner bell to a deer. And stuff, yeah. So
was that rig that you had when you were young, the one that went through the mud hole?
Oh yeah, yes.
Was that a Subaru?
No, it was a No.
Oh,
Nobody's.
I gotta tell you a story. My sister.
You want the wine?
Sure. My sister worked at that school for 42 years, and she used to wear lace collars on her dresses and stuff, and she'd come home, and then in the summer she'd head off to northern Maine, where she worked with my brother on his camps that were like hunting camps that he rented out to people. So they had some guests who wanted to run the Allagash. And they wanted to park in one location and be picked up and put their other vehicle in another location. So they put their vehicle in the other location, and my brother wanted to portage them up to where they were gonna start out. So he didn't have enough space in his pickup truck to take 3 kayaks and however many people there was. And so he asked my sister to come with him in her Subaru. Well, this was early in the summer. It had been raining a lot. And this is the Allagash Road, which is pretty
I know, yeah.
And so they come to this place, and the bridge was washed out. And so my brother has this big old pickup truck, and he just goes right on. And the water is coming up over my sister's, she's following him, it's coming up over her hood.
Oh, geez.
And she just keeps on going.
Yeah.
And she made it through. And the guest said, "Well, if that isn't an ad for Subaru, I don't know what it is."
Yeah.